Andiamo zitti la mano, perché lo stiamo facendo una balla, ma si vede che molla, mi sembra molla per sopra la si può la mattina, quando facciamo la mattina, cosa ci può la mattina.
Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk about something that I would call communicating adulthood. What does that mean? Well, basically, when I'm looking at communication and I'm looking at all the different things in the world, I'm kind of looking at it from that communication lens. And when it comes to being an adult, well, what does that mean? How does that communicate things? How do we know that you're an adult? How are you communicating that? And that's an interesting thing to be thinking about, and it's something I see every day because I'm surrounded with college students who are, by legal definition, adults. Even whenever I have the occasional dual enrollment student who's still in high school and they're taking college classes, I get to treat them as adults. And sometimes in some court cases, you'll see someone who does something, that's heinous enough that they get tried as an adult. So what does it mean, though, to communicate adulthood? And, one thing that I've been thinking about that lately is, you'll hear a lot of times, and maybe you said it, it's most likely at some point I said it, we get that point in life where we start getting a little bit older, and that's our formative teenage years, and we're tired of being treated like children, and we end up saying something along the lines of, treat me like an adult. But do we really mean that? What would that really look like if we were all treated like adults all the time? And what should adulthood look like? Now, a lot of times people say, treat me like an adult, say that because, well, there's something that they want. And the truth of the matter is it's more like treat me like an adult when it deals with things that I want, not when it comes time for things I have to do. Because the truth of the matter is, when it comes to how we treat children or how we treat other adults, we do this in two different ways. I mean, we recognize that children, well, they have some developmental needs. They're not quite adults yet. And a lot of studies show the human mind isn't truly mature until, age 24, age 25 or so. But legally, we say you can be considered an adult at age 18. So age 17 and 364 days, you're still a child or a minor or whatever you want to call it. But that one day later, boom, now instantly you're an adult. You can vote. You can drive past midnight in some states. You can, possess firearms. You can do all kinds of things. Join the military, So what does it mean then to communicate adulthood? Well, I was just thinking about this because there are times where you'll come across times where people say, look, I'm going to be treated like an adult. And what that is an inward yearning that there's something more than what I currently have. Because you do recognize when you're a child, you're restricted. And it's from a parent or legal guardian who says, you can do this, but not this. You can do these things over here, but not these things over here. And we tend to wonder and ask why. In fact, that's one of the greatest things about children is they're not afraid to ask why. And a lot of times they don't have a filter, and they'll keep asking why and keep asking why, keep questioning things because they don't understand it. They're trying to seek some kind of knowledge, some kind of understanding of the world around them. And at some point we stop doing that, and maybe sometimes we either quit caring or we learn that maybe I shouldn't ask in this situation. But we realize ultimately there's some kind of restriction that's holding us back. And frankly, we as humans don't like restrictions, especially when we're younger. We want to bust loose. We want to be free. And a lot of times you'll hear young people say, I get to finally, I'm old enough, I can go do whatever I want. I'm going to be an adult so I can do whatever I want. Now, those of us who've been adults for more than a hot minute understand that doing whatever I want is definitely not part of adulthood. Because what happens in youth? Well, you're born, you're raised in a home, and you're told you can do this, but you can't do that, and all these other little barriers that are put up around you. Then you go to a school district and you become a student in either a K through 12 public school or private school setting or even homeschooling, and you're put in these little parameters and you're told what to do and how to behave and how to act. And we see that by how you respond to those things. And ultimately, we set up those barriers for young people for their own goods, because their own good, because we recognize they need to understand that there are times that you need to be shepherded in, because if you did run off and do what you want, I mean, quite frankly, I mean, who wouldn't go eat as many donuts as you could? I mean, that'd be a wonderful thing. Or, like if there's a pizza, a brand new, fresh, hot out of the oven pizza, boy, I could eat a lot of that. Should I? Well, no, you can have 2 slices. You can have a treat only if you clean your plate. You can go play only after you do your homework. And we see all of these conditional things put on us when we're young. And who really likes that? I mean, not too many people really enjoy a good condition thrown on them. So we start thinking, you know what? I can't wait to become an adult that I could do what I want. But if you've been an adult, you recognize that actually that's not really true, because once you get out of those conditions that are set up throughout all your youth, then you go off to college. Freedom! Finally, I'm out from the parents and I can go do what no. You're going to have to go to classes, and you don't get to pick what you want. You're told when certain classes are, and you're going to have to make decisions. I could do this or that. And you join maybe a sports team where you're told that you will do this and you won't do that. You're going to have weightlifting at 6 a.m. and you're thinking, do what now? And you have all of these different things that are thrown at you. And you're like, boy, this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. Then you go get a dorm room, and there's all kinds of restrictions there. You have a resident advisor who's there, and maybe you got a senior resident advisor. You got all these people who are going to tell you, how you can and can't live, how you should or shouldn't live. And you're also thrown into the mix with a whole bunch of other strangers who think that they're going to get to do what they want. And you find out real quick that just because I'm away from home now, I can blast my stereo. Well, now you're going to upset all the people around you too. And you're going to learn the consequences of that kind of an action. So you learn real quick, well, maybe college isn't it. Maybe once I graduate, then I get to, go do what I want. When? I mean, you're going to go work somewhere, and they're going to tell exactly how to do that job and where to be and when to be. And it's one of those things where you're just thinking, I don't know that I like this. And I warn my students, in fairness, I tell them, stay in college as long as you can. I mean, if you can survive the crippling debt, I mean, hey, why not stay in college? Keep taking classes, learn as much stuff as you can, because once you get out there in the real world, the fun stops. And they might say, well, I want that kind of fun because your classes aren't very fun. I've got to do homework and reading. It's like, my classes are simple compared to the real world. And they don't realize how simple college is. I mean, at the very bare minimum, to be a full-time student, you have to have 12 credits. Full-time is typically around 18 credits. That's a whopping 6 classes. 6 classes, that's it. So 6, 3 hours per class. So you're looking 18 hours a week of class time. Then some homework time thrown in there too. Let's say you double that up for the sake of homework, an extra hour. So you're still looking at 36 hours. That's it, 36 hours a week. That's not even a full-time job yet. You have to get to 40. They have no idea that there's such a thing as 40-hour weeks, 50-hour weeks, 60-hour weeks. I've worked 70-hour weeks. They exist. So I get to do what I want. Then they're surprised. They get out of college. They get that first job. They're working 40, 50 hours a week. They go home and they're exhausted. And they piece together some kind of a meal and then just veg out on the couch, and it's a new day. And they were like, what happened? I thought there was going to be fun here. And because I get to do what I want as an adult. The truth of the matter is, to communicate adulthood has nothing to do with, having tons of free time to do what you want. Communicating as an adult means showing what to do within the time, which is a scary thing, because when you're young, you don't understand what time even means and how time can even affect you. I mean, you just think there's no such thing as time. I mean, I was, given a bit of advice when it came to like raising children. Like if you ever say, hold on, honey, give me 2 more minutes. Don't say things like that, because they don't know what 2 minutes even is. We know what 2 minutes is, and we have even an internal clock. We can get an idea of what 2 minutes is, and we can kind of figure that out. They have no idea what 2 minutes is. You could have said 2 millennia, and they'd have the same basic framework. They have no idea, which is why a lot of kids melt down when you say, just give me 5 more minutes, because they don't know what that means. You could have said 5 months. They don't know. So it's one of those things that just, when you're trying to have a conversation with children, you have to realize they don't have a real strong concept of time. Well, you think about that as you move on into adulthood. Think about how you use your time in each day. How are you spending your time? How are you wasting your time? I mean, I'll have students who say, I don't have time to read. And I'll say, how much time are you spending on your phone? Well, they'll get real sheepish then and him and haw. The average human spends 7 hours a day on screens. 7. Think what you could do with 7 hours. My goodness. So what did we do before then? Well, we actually talked to each other. We played and we did other stuff. And maybe we actually did our homework too sometimes. But the point is, well, how are you spending your time? Because we're only given so much. I mean, we have it set 24 hours. And then you take a third of that for your sleep. And then a third of that goes to school or work. Then you just have a third left. What are you doing with that time? And too often we find ourselves just casually just wasting it, really. And we don't spend as much time with, reflection or personal development or meditation or prayer or anything. We spend it kind of casually blowing it. And you start thinking about, wow, most of my time is spent just blowing things just right on by. So if you average 7 hours, that means, there might be someone who only spends 5 minutes a day on screen time. But that means there's somebody's probably out there doing 12 hours or something crazy. That's a real thing. And when you start thinking about students who are constantly fed into a system that gives them Chromebooks and stuff, and that's all they do is pure screen time, they don't have much real time where they're getting out and just enjoying life and each other, So how are you spending your free time? Whenever you have any kind of time, how are you spending it? And it's not just young people. It's easy to point young people, but go to the dentist's office and you'll see a little old lady in the corner there. Instead of talking with somebody, she's scrolling on her phone. And you're thinking wow, when did I wake up and I'm in a world of everybody stuck to phones? But that's just the way we have as a society has changed. And we're in that position now where we kind of recognize that as a normal thing. So when it comes to time, how do we look and even value time? Now, there are a couple of ways we can look at time. We can look at what's known as a monochromatic view or a polychromatic view. Now, if you think of, chronos, time, mono, one, or poly, many, and you think of how you view time, there are some people who view time as very much a very hot commodity. Time is money. Everything comes out of time. Don't waste my time. Every minute counts. They're very punctual for everything. And so they're very concerned about time and what's happening within that specific piece of time. So you see that a lot in northern states where people always seem to be on the go, and everything seems to matter. I know I was very much attuned to that back when I was in college, because I actually started working in radio when I was in college. So I would sit there and I would be at the radio station and I'd be watching my watch to the second, and I'd have all my watches or whatever tuned to the second to national time. Now, this is before cell phones or GPS watches, and you had to actually keep an eye on what the studio clock was, because that was set up to national time. Because a lot of times, not just if you're not worried about any kind of commercials coming from a national satellite feed, you don't have to care as much. But if you have a satellite fed commercial coming in right at 6 o'clock a.m. or 6 o'clock p.m. or whatever, it's coming in exactly at 6 o'clock and 0 seconds. It's getting fed in, and you have to be ready, because if you end a song too early, now you have dead air. If a song goes on too long, now you have cross chatter, and they're both equally bad. So you pay attention to that time. So the song ends perfectly right when the commercial comes on and starts. And if you're doing something totally locally, and I'm pushing the buttons and starting my commercials whenever I'm good and ready, not a big worry. But I worked at stations that had national feeds coming in. I also worked at stations that carried baseball games for the Pittsburgh Pirates. I also worked at stations that carried University of Pittsburgh football, also the Pittsburgh Steelers football. So it's one of those things that that stuff is coming. You don't get to delay the game on your own. When time is of the essence in those situations, because they'll call timeout, and you have a 2-minute slot, so you're playing commercials and getting those 30-second commercials in. And if you have a commercial that's 35 seconds long, well, now you're going to go into they cut into the game, and boy, you want to get people mad, cut into their game with a commercial. So people who are monochronic, they're very much thinking of the idea of how much does time matter, what happens within each moment of time, and that's important. Now people who are polychronic are thinking more along the ideas of I need to be thinking of what happens within the space of time. So I'm thinking about time in general. Like, for example, you're hanging around with your friends and you're chatting, and next thing you go, oh my goodness, it's 2 a.m. Where'd the time go? Well, that's a good idea of polychronic time. I don't know where the time went because I'm more concerned of what's happening within time than I am about time itself. So, if I'm thinking about time, I'm focusing on, well, am I using the best of the time that I have and what I'm doing with that time? So we tend to have that kind of mindset of one or the other, where I'm thinking of time is of the essence, or hey, let's focus what's happening within time. Now, of course, a third view would probably be people who just don't think much about time and just kind of live and just do their own thing, kind of casually, not paying attention to time. Those are the people who are chronically late, I guess. But other than that, I mean, you tend to be in a situation where if I'm going to communicate what it means to be an adult, it means I need to be, of course, painfully aware of time and how much it matters, and also painfully aware of what's happening within the time. I've got to be floating between both those viewpoints. And I have to be able to then communicate, on top of that, the things that I understand to be adulthood, communicate those things responsibly. So whenever I am someplace, I'm not just aware that time is passing, but I'm also being present in that time. And I'm being responsible in that time. And that I can show that I can be present and responsible, showing that I'm overall responsible with time. And it's one of those things that we tend to think that, oh, I can do that. But it's amazing how much training it takes for people to understand the importance of showing responsibility. So I know there are many times that I would like to just sit back and do nothing, but there are things to do that I should do. And I've been bitten in the butt before, times when I should be grading and I just don't feel like it, so I just rest instead or do something else. And then guess what? We get closer to the time when grades are due and I'm crunching along trying to get grading done. What a nightmare. And then I get mad. Why didn't I just grade back on that one day when I just rested instead? So again, communicating adulthood, understands who you are in your time and what is expected of you in that time. And there's so many of us that don't understand, what that means. And quite frankly, it is not, always fun. It would be way more cool to sit around and eat ice cream and do whatever you want and hang out with your friends. The good old days, get on the bikes and let's go ride around and just ignore, all the worries of the world. But, at some days you do have to grow up. That's not to say you could have some, childish behavior in your adulthood now and then, but ultimately we have to grow up, and to keep jobs, to keep relationships, we have to be adults. And that means being responsible, being aware, not just of myself and my own needs and my own feelings. That whole, when I get older, I can do whatever I want. As soon as I'm an adult, I can do what I want. I can't wait to be an adult. It's such a backwards thought to when you really get into adulthood, because as soon as I get to be adulthood, I'm more constrained than I've ever been, and I have to be much more aware of the other than I've ever been. When you're a little kid, you don't have to care about time. You don't have to care about other people. You just do stuff that you want to do. When you get to be an adult, I have to start thinking of who else is in this room with me? Who else is in this town with me? Who else is in this world with me? Man, that doesn't sound fun. But it is. It is fun to think about other people and to care about other people. Because who wants to be alone? Like, yeah, you got your ice cream and you got to nap. But what? You were alone. That's not very fun. That's not fun at all. It's much more fun to be with other people. And if I could be with other people and I could maybe act as an adult and care for them and, help them to grow, help them to succeed, that's actually kind of rewarding. So if I'm communicating adulthood, I'm thinking about all of these different things, all these responsibilities that I have. My understanding of time, my understanding of being present, my understanding of all the surroundings I have, the property and things that I am basically entrusted with. All that stuff comes to play with me being an adult. Now, do I like to get out and have fun now and then? Sure. That's ideally what I have for weekends. I try to make sure I maintain my time and run it well through the week, so when the weekend comes, I can actually enjoy it and kind of unplug for a while and hide. But again, that's an adult way of dealing with it. That's the way I can communicate it. Do what I need to do and enjoy it, when the time comes to actually have some free time. So that's what I have for you today. So thank you very much for tuning in and listening. And I appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in this long anyway. But we'll see you next time on Communicology.